What if you could have an extra hour to take your CFP exam without actually really there being any more time? If you really use a strategic breakdown of every minute during your exam session, you can be much more efficient than the average test taker, and literally those minutes can add up to close to an hour. So this video is going to be a conversation and also a little bit of a live demonstration on how to approach actual CFP exam questions that you'll face in the moment on your real test. People who sit for and take the CFP exam answer on surveys over and over again that time management is actually the biggest pitfall in their ability to pass the test. Poor time management leads to panic and stress, and then ultimately bad decision making, where even the questions you know how to answer correctly, you won't be able to, and then some of the other questions that could have been gimmies, you don't even end up getting to. There are 170 questions on the CFP exam, and with 6 hours total, that's just a little over 2 minutes per question. So be aware that just knowing the material on its own isn't enough to pass the CFP exam. You have to actually use some tactical or strategic thinking. There are a couple of primary themes to this strategic pacing that we're going to talk about. The first of which being what we can call question triage. Question triage is the art of identifying those quick wins right when you start reading the question, compared to getting stuck in some of those time traps. I'll use a few real-world examples in just a moment to show you how that looks, but if you're someone who's currently studying for a CFP exam and you've already taken some practice questions, you should have an idea about what it is I'm referring to. I would say that maybe 50 or even 60% of the questions you'll face on the CFP exam can be answered pretty quickly with knowledge of a simple formula or a relatively simple concept. That percentage range is going to differ person by person, but no matter what your level of preparedness, the point is that you will run into questions that you've seen before, or at least seen the ideas or concepts on before, and you will know how to answer them and answer them relatively quickly. Now, to be clear, I'm not saying that you should skim the entire exam booklet and simply on the first pass answer each of the questions that you feel like you know how to do quickly. I would not go through the whole thing 2 or 3 times, and that's what that process would include. But what I am saying is identifying in your mind a question that you know, reading it, answering it, and moving on. And then in the next question, let's say there's a 50% chance that this is also one you know that you know. Read it, answer it, move on. You may have knocked out 2 questions in a matter of 45 seconds, and so you're sort of banking extra time, and we're going to talk about what to do with that extra time bank a little bit later on. And of course, you will run into questions that you either aren't sure on whether or not you know, or you are sure that those types of questions are going to take you a long time to answer. In those scenarios, you will be skipping over many of them. Now, you might come back to them at the end of every 1 hour period or so, or you wait until the end of the entire test session, 3-hour session, to go back and review all the questions that you've marked and you've skipped. And yes, that can be actually more than half of your total time that you spend answering questions, but the point is that you're really dividing these things into 2 categories. Ones that you know and you can knock out quickly, and questions that are going to take a little bit more work and, more importantly, a little bit more time. And this concept that I'm describing is not a one-size-fits-all, because like I mentioned, it's going to differ person by person how many questions you're really familiar with or what types of questions you're really familiar with. It will also differ how comfortable you are with skipping over a certain quantity of questions. And so you really need to practice this idea or this test concept on your own using multiple CFP practice exams, and that will probably be what we'll discuss at the last part of this video. But the point is that using this concept even while you're practicing will help you identify what portion of questions you feel most comfortable leaving until the second half or until the end of the exam. Maybe even some questions that you're a little questioning on, you feel more comfortable actually just giving those a shot and making a decision and moving on. You definitely don't want to linger on them, especially if you're doing them in your first pass. But other people actually will feel more comfortable only answering the questions they know 100% cold before they get back to the questions that they marked and want to review. So you're going to have to practice this on your own just to figure out what works best for you. Now, the real reason that this entire strategy ends up becoming very time efficient is because it cuts out any waste that you would have otherwise had thinking about questions that may take you more time, and then let's say you spend 45 seconds thinking about a question and then you go, actually, this is going to take me a while to answer, and then you move on to the next one without actually sinking your teeth into the question you just spent 45 seconds on. So again, when you're only prioritizing the questions that you either know you know, or the questions that you're comfortable with just giving your best shot and moving on, that is going to leave as much banked time as you will possibly get for those questions that will take more than 2 minutes, the questions that really you'll need to work through in order to answer right. So let's walk through 3 real practice questions from a mock CFP exam. We're gonna look at, in this case, numbers 14, 15, and 16 because they illustrate this concept well. They come from a investment planning section of this practice exam. We don't need to read through the 7-paragraph scenario just to illustrate the concept. And actually, again, if you're studying for exam, you'll recognize a lot of these. So number 14, as I start reading, from the perspective of the issuer, tips, Treasury inflation protected securities. I do think it's helpful to identify what we're talking about in your own head as you read it. Tips are best described as which of the following types of liability. So the issuer, the person who sold the bond and raised the cash. So right away, do we know who the issuer is? Do we know what tips are? And do we know these 3 types of liabilities? If the answers are yes, then good. This is one of the questions we should be able to answer right away. So I know the issuer is the company who sold the bond. I know tips are inflation protected bonds, and I know what these 3 types of liabilities are. And if you understand how tips work, you know that from the issuer's perspective, the amount is going to be unknown because they have to pay interest floating with interest rates, but they do know the timing. They've issued a bond that says when they will make those interest payments. So right away, that tells us that this is a type C answer. But again, the concept here is that if we know what is meant by issuer, if we know what is meant by tips, and if we know what these 3 types of liabilities are because we've studied these concepts, then we identify this question as one we want to answer right away. We answer it and we keep going. Next question, number 15. Which form of immunization will most likely meet the objective of portfolio A to minimize the initial funding while also having a higher expected return? So I think the things to identify in our minds are, do we understand the objective of portfolio A? Do we understand what's meant by initial funding? And do we know what's meant by higher expected return? If we do, then the 3 options here, horizon matching, duration matching, and contingent immunization, should speak something to us. Right now, I don't remember these concepts myself, so I mark this one, which when you're taking your CFP exam online, there is a function to flag question or mark question for review, and I would come back to this. Question number 16, which of the following amounts is closest to the leverage return on portfolio B over the projected 1-year horizon? So we read it, we ask ourselves, oh, do I know how to calculate a leveraged return? Personally, I'm pretty sure that I do remember how to calculate that. Just looking at the case quickly, we see that the portfolio generates a 10% pre-tax return. There's a 30% tax rate, so that would give us a 7% after-tax return. But then we're leveraged up. And if I'm telling myself, oh yeah, I know how to calculate a leveraged return, then my brain should go to, all right, well, what's the leverage ratio here? The case tells me very quickly that we've borrowed $25 million on a $60 million portfolio. So calculate your own ratio, it's about 0.29. I simply take my 7% rate of return, and a little bit of algebra gets me to answer B at 7.89%, post-tax, that is. Don't get trapped into using the pre-tax calculation on the leverage, which would be option C. So make sure you're using the 30% tax rate in your algebra. But not talking really about algebra here, not talking about how to calculate leverage return here. What I am talking about is, did I understand what the question was asking me? How do I calculate leverage return and over a 1-year horizon? If I answer in my head, yeah, I know how to calculate leverage return, then I should go to, what piece of info do I need? Pre-tax and after-tax return, assumed rate of growth, and the leverage ratio. And that's literally, it's like a 3-variable algebra equation. So once you tell yourself, yeah, I know how to do this, do it, mark it, answer your right answer and move right along. Again, the overarching theme here is identify what you know, answer it, and move on. Don't be shy, don't second guess yourself. Once you've already told yourself, yeah, I have practiced this, I do know how to answer this type of question, then do it, trust your practice. That's all you can rely on the exam day, is trusting that practice you have. If I were to go through 170 questions, maybe I'm hoping that 110 of them I can answer like this and move on. And it's probably taking me 30 seconds to 50 seconds per question. Should be under a minute for the ones you know how to do. Remember, you have a little over 2 minutes on average per question. So if I answer 110 in 100 minutes, well, you know, it's split up into 2 halves, so it wouldn't exactly work that way. But the point is that I'm left with another 140 minutes during the course of my exam day to answer only 60 more questions. You know, now I've basically multiplied the time that I have to use on the difficult questions. Why? I've eliminated the slop of reading the question, contemplating it, wondering whether or not I remember if I know how to solve it, maybe even trying it once or twice and then failing and then going, oh shoot, I need to move on from here. I've eliminated all that waste. I've focused on the ones that I know how to do. I've gotten all the points that I think I can get quickly. And now I've come back on my second pass to address the questions that I know are gonna be more time consuming. On this second pass, you can start with the questions that you know how to solve, but maybe they just require more math to solve, more steps, and so those steps will take more time. I certainly don't recommend simply pondering over and over concepts that you know you've read before, but you can't remember which way, you can't remember a certain term, you know. All that is to say, even in your second pass, when you're looking at your marked questions, you're also doing a mini version of what you've already just done. And that mini version is first answering the ones that, again, you think you know how to do, but just understand that they're gonna be more time consuming. What that will do is effectively try to then maximize the next most points that you can get right on the exam before you go to the ones that you really need to probably struggle with. And there certainly will be some that you really need to struggle with. It's always gonna be that case. You're never gonna know 100% of the questions on the exam, and that's okay. But it's not okay if you use up all your time on those questions that you don't really know how to answer. Honestly, this is a good way to create more time for yourself. It is an awesome exam day strategy, and it can definitely help increase your chances of passing. As I mentioned, you want to be practicing this approach through at least 2 or 3, probably hopefully 4, 5, 6, maybe 7 or 8 mock exams leading up to your real CFP exam, just so that you can get comfortable with understanding what types of questions you feel good answering right away and what types of questions you would prefer to wait on because you think they're gonna take you more time. Ideally, you wanna be answering 60 or 70% of the questions right away on their first pass because you've identified that those are the types of questions you know how to answer quickly. And at the risk of talking about a totally separate topic here, I do think it's relevant enough to just mention that on exam day, your mindset will make a big difference because your mindset is gonna impact the amount of stress you're feeling. And a little bit of stress is good, but too much stress then starts to disrupt the efficiency of your brain. Like literally I don't understand how the biology of the brain works, but the connections between your neurons won't fire as well, and you won't be able to recall information that you otherwise would have been able to if you were mostly relaxed. So just understanding and trusting your preparation, and then also understanding that you are coming into this with hopefully the most efficient utilization of time that you possibly can have, and let those two facts be calming to you, and understand that you can do everything that you are going to be able to do that day, and you can't do anything more than that. So as long as you put in your best effort, you're going to give yourself the highest probability of passing your exam. Best of luck out there studying, and as always, have a good one.